Hey, what's up, guys? Austin from Know Your Music here, and I've got a sort of a vlog for you, I guess. I can show you something I grabbed at the thrift store real quick. $1, and this is a little treasure for me here, okay? Kind of throwing back to the 90s and early 2000s. An artist who just obliterated the charts and the sales records and everything else about the genre that he was singing in. And got this man right here, this Garth Brooks live. One of initially 7 different covers they released for this album. There's now 10 or maybe 11. There's 11 different covers for this album now. And it's all the same track listing except for the latest one. They added a couple of bonus tracks too for his coming out of retirement party. Anyway, Garth Brooks, got that for $1, and it's a 2 CD set too, and it was really clean, so that's a good find for a thrift store. I wanted to talk just a few minutes here about country music. It's always been a favorite of mine, even back from when I was a kid. I've definitely had influences given to me from my dad as far as, classic rock and stuff like that goes. He always liked the Eagles. Was a big fan of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, who I love. Bands like that, Little River Band he liked, and I dug at least one of their albums. But early on, also, I remember him having My Home's in Alabama, which was Alabama's first studio album, on a cassette tape, which was pretty cool back then too, because mostly it was vinyl. But that little compact cassette, listened to that quite a bit, and I really enjoyed it. And then we moved out here. About 83. I'm just going to try to make sure you guys don't fall here. I think we've got a little problem happening here. Let's see what we're going to do with you. Let's put you up over here, and we'll call that good. Anyway, we moved out here to Utah about 1983, and the very next year, we were at a little store called Fred Meyer, which was kind of like a I don't know, it was like a jazzed up Kmart, Walmart type of thing. It was a little bit classier, a little bit nicer store. Anyway, they had the electronics section there, and I pointed out a tape that had a trailer on it from, maybe a 48-foot trailer. It had a big, what I called a rebel flag on it. It was, the Confederate flag, but it had the Alabama logo across it, and it was Alabama's new album at the time. It was called Roll On. My dad bought it for me. And I just played the heck out of that thing. I just loved it to death, and just played it and played it and played it. And anyway, that's really got me into country music even more. I remember sitting in class in 4th grade, and the music teacher had come in at that point and said, by show of hands, who likes pop and rock music here? And everybody but 2 people raised their hands, me being one of them. And then she said, who likes country? And me and the other kid both raised our hands. To a lot of odd looks and a couple of boos and so forth. But anyway, for me, I loved country music back then, but the only artist I really knew very well was Alabama. I wasn't quite the music man that I am today, so it was a slow process getting into all that stuff. But anyway, sorry, it's a little shaky. My thing fell off the windshield, and I'm just going to hold the camera now. Anyway, enter the 90s. Okay, I've got a buddy who is from Louisiana, who's moved out here to Utah with his family now. His dad's a pilot, so they moved around a bit. And he asked me, have you ever heard of Chris Ledoux? Well, I hadn't. And he played me a tape of Chris's, which had come out after Chris got signed to Liberty Capital in the late 80s. I think it was 89 that they signed him, and then in 1991 they re-released all of his old recordings onto CDs and stuff like that. But he played me an album, Western Underground, and I loved it. At the time, like I said, the only country artist I really knew was Alabama, and throughout that decade, previous to the rest of that decade anyway, I had gotten into a lot of rock and roll, hard rock, heavy metal, that kind of stuff. And he played me that Chris Ledoux album, and there was a couple songs on there that had some just mean guitar on them, good lead guitar and some good chugging rhythms and stuff like that. And I was like, man, if this is what country music is, I'm digging it. So I liked it. I told him I liked it. I made a copy of it so I could listen to it myself. And anyway, that was kind of the start of my second stint with country music, which has lasted up until present day. I went and checked out, I went and bought a couple of albums in the early 90s just to kind of, keep a little bit of country into my collection. And it was probably about 1994 that I really started buying just almost exclusively country at that point in time. There were, some rock records back then that I absolutely had to have, and I kept, I would buy those and keep them in my collection. But by that time, it was Tim McGraw had gotten really big. John Michael Montgomery had gotten really big. And, of course, there was this man that I just showed you here, Garth Brooks, who had a few albums out by that time, and I loved them all. They were all awesome. But aside from that, the guy, Chris Ledoux, was still releasing albums anew throughout the 90s, but at the same time, I was able to go back all the way to 1972 and listen to all these different rodeo songs that he had done. It was amazing to me even back then that this man could sing about stuff that didn't involve the typical country, drinking, leaving, cheating songs, which I didn't have a problem with back then. It's just that's what it was, I mean, I didn't know any better one way or the other. I was still a kid, but anyway, I was, got into all that old Chris Ledoux stuff, and it got me into old country, and that's where I found the George Strait and the Johnny Cash and artists like that. Anyway, bottom line is I've been a country fan for a long time now, because of those days and those artists and those albums.